This is kind of wild.
Well, hello, everyone. I know there was a little bit of technical difficulty in the auditorium. We apologize for that with the time and the countdown timer on the agenda, but we're going to get going, and the session will be recorded and folks can watch it later. I want to take a moment and introduce our first keynote of the conference, Meg Tally Dyer. Meg is both a rare disease mother and patient who actively advocates for the rare disease community. Her journey began in 2014 when her daughter was diagnosed with beta propeller protein associated neurodegeneration, a form of NBIA known as BPAN. Dylan was 3 at the time and was severely developmentally delayed and showed many markers of autism and was suffering from seizures that could not be explained. When Dylan was diagnosed, she was the youngest child affected by the disorder, and Meg was devastated to learn that Dylan's disease would be degenerative. Meg's grief drove her to learn everything she could about NBIA and BPAN, which led her to the NBIA Disorders Association. She joined the board in 2016, and Dylan continues to be her inspiration to help her steer the organization and help individuals with families affected by NBIA. We'd like for everyone to please welcome Meg.
Good morning. I'm Meg Tally Dyer. I am honored to be here with you today. My life is turning out far differently than I had expected, and I imagine some of you at this conference will relate to parts of my story. Just one second, please. Thank you. So I imagine that some of you will relate to parts of my story. I am a tenacious business leader, a passionate nonprofit leader, a nagging but loving wife, and a friend who is often a bad influence. But I am also a rare disease mother and patient. Early in my career, I was a woman who prioritized my ambitions over all else, not one who planned for a family. Yet, when I turned 27, our beautiful daughter Dylan was born. My story is not unique, nor do I have some miraculous tale detailing how I figured it all out. But I am here to share my journey with you today and the ways the image of a feisty little furry animal has given me the courage to keep on keeping on, no matter what is thrown my way. My hope is that you'll find pieces of my story that you relate to, and we can each learn and grow by tapping into our collective experiences. A decade ago, at 6 weeks postpartum, crying in a parking lot as I tried to muster the courage to walk into an interview at a multi-trillion-dollar company I desperately wanted to join, I discovered a force within me, one that would serve me for the rest of my life. This interview was the first time I'd been away from my baby girl, and I was a complete mess. Afraid I would fail and lose what felt like the opportunity of a lifetime, I called my husband from the car in hysterics. And to this day, the words he spoke to me have remained an inspiration. He said, "Meg, you've got this. You're smart, you're driven, and they'd be lucky to have you. You are a mother-flipping mongoose, so go slay that cobra." And that moment is when my mongoose was born. Mongooses, and yes, that is the plural because I did look it up, are lesser known creatures of the wild found in Africa, Asia, and Southern Europe. And although they're little and could be considered cute, these animals are best known for their ability to combat venomous snakes. You might be familiar with the most famous mongoose, Rikki Tikki Tavi, who's a fictional protagonist in the Jungle Book who saved a young boy from a deadly cobra. You see, what I didn't understand as I sat in that parking lot was that this would be the first of many times in my life I would need to draw on the strength of my inner mongoose. So I walked into that meeting with a renewed confidence, yet I broke all of the rules. I talked about my daughter a lot, and I was honest about my concerns with my current employer and why I was pursuing a new career with this company. There was no posturing or positioning because I'm just really not very good at that anyway. And as a result, I was totally sure walking out of that interview that there's no way they would hire me. But much to my surprise, I was offered that job within 48 hours. And now, 10 years later, my life has taken a different path. My daughter, Dylan, just turned 10 and is quite possibly the most charismatic person I've ever met. She is filled with a love for life and adventure, and from day one would never, ever sit still. She has always been quick to let us know when she wants something, especially when we aren't delivering. And she has an incredible desire to be heard, always having a story to tell anyone who will listen. And Dylan leads a generally happy life, yet the primary source of her frustration is the inability to be heard, or more accurately, the inability to be understood. Among other challenges, Dylan has something called Apraxia of Speech, which essentially means that when she speaks, her words become jumbled and are hard to understand, almost like a voice scrambler. But this does not stop her, because anyone who knows Dylan knows it's impossible to not listen to her loud and incessant chatter. Now, since she doesn't communicate like other kids her age, she's learned to use an augmentative communication device, which is an iPad with a special program where she can help us understand her needs and wants through pictures. And like many of you out there, after hour-long and stressful days in the office, our work seems to just be beginning. It's making dinner, medicine, bath time, hopefully just a handful of tantrums if we're lucky, and of course, stories and cuddles. And we look forward to our chaotic weekends where up until the madness of 2020, we could be found at a splash pad or a park chasing each other around, at endless playdates and birthday parties, or cheering Dylan on at a Special Olympics cheer, track, or swimming event. Now, as I look back on her life, I realize that although Dylan looks exactly like my husband, from day one, we realized she had all of my spirit. She was full of sass from the start, wanting to eat, sleep, and poop on her own schedule. And this was a harsh reality for a highly independent woman who had come to believe she could manage anything. I immediately learned what it meant to have another person be fully dependent on me for every want and need. And when Dylan struggled to latch, I blamed myself and my lack of knowledge and scoured the internet for breastfeeding best practices. I'm not kidding. Be careful when you Google search things like that. As Dylan reached 18 months, I watched as other children her age began to walk, talk, and achieve each of the expected milestones. Conversely, though, Dylan began to demonstrate many sensory-seeking and aggressive behaviors, and it became clear that she was falling severely behind developmentally. And it was then that she also began to suffer from seizures. We took her to a pediatrician who tried to reassure us that children develop at their own pace, confidently stating that she would catch up in her own time and that these epileptic episodes were simple febrile seizures that she would likely outgrow. And during this chapter in our lives, we found ourselves in the ER more times than I can count, and each specialist we would see continued to minimize her symptoms. I was left wondering if I might be crazy, but my gut told me something was wrong. Part of me felt that I should trust and listen to these experts, but my mongoose was stirring, pushing me to trust that instinct and to fight for the answers that Dylan deserved. Her life could depend on it. At the same time, while trying to navigate a medical system that didn't seem to care or even want to understand my daughter, I was also climbing the corporate ladder. I was being groomed for roles with increasing levels of responsibility. In fact, on 2 occasions when Dylan was in the hospital, I found myself faced with what felt like an impossible decision: to either remain at my husband's side while our daughter was being seen, or to move forward with an interview for a role which could provide increased levels of financial security for my family. What I didn't understand at that time was that if I had just been open about what was happening with Dylan, others would have been more than happy to move these meetings. But instead, I pushed forward and proceeded with the interviews both times. And although I successfully earned these promotions, it's decisions like these that I have questioned a million times over. I look back and wonder if my mongoose was leading me a bit astray, focused on fighting for my career instead of focusing my energy on my daughter. 2 years later, we had a pivotal visit to the ER. Again, our concerns were dismissed, and while I was scared, tired, and angry, I felt my mongoose coming out. I refused to leave this hospital until someone gave me answers. I was ready to handcuff myself to that hospital bed if I had to. I didn't care that the word Munchausen was beginning to be whispered. I could no longer continue without answers for my daughter, despite these comments alluding to me imagining a fictitious illness. But fortunately, a soon-to-be retired geneticist who was on call agreed to review her case, and incredibly, after years of desperate searching, the new chapter in our lives began. With the help of this geneticist, an epilepsy specialist, and a neurogeneticist, we finally had a team of doctors who, combined with a breakthrough in mass market access to the whole exome sequencing test, helped us find our answer: beta propeller protein-associated neurodegeneration, an MBIA disorder known as BPAN. We were in shock. What the heck is beta propeller protein-associated neurodegeneration? And information was scarce, and our team of doctors admitted they knew nothing about this disease and offered to do some reading and get back to us. But ever impatient, I did what all naive parents do and began a deep and dark journey into the depths of Google. And it was not a good call. I had entered now a panicked crisis mode, and I know some of you out there can relate. I did, though, find one research paper which at that point read like a foreign language to me. What I could understand was terrifying. Her disease was described as degenerative, and it highlighted insights from the 15 other cases that were known at the time of publication and illuminated what I could expect her journey to be. She would not likely achieve a developmental age beyond 5. And in her teens or early 20s, she was expected to experience a rapid decline of both physical and cognitive function. And her life would be cut far too short by this awful disease. I had been desperately searching for an answer so I could help Dylan. What I found instead felt like a death sentence. Pardon my language, but what the fuck? Instead of waiting for my medical team to find answers, I decided I was going to go find them myself. I sent an email to the lead researcher of that paper I found, and another to the president of the MBIA Disorders Association. And frankly, I wasn't expecting a response from either. Yet incredibly, I heard from both within hours. I learned that at that time, there were only 50 known BPAN cases worldwide, and Dylan was the youngest known person with the disorder. I was amazed at the support and encouragement in those first conversations. Both the research team and this patient advocacy organization reinforced their commitment to end the suffering of MBIA and to find a treatment and ultimately a cure. For the first time since she was that tiny little baby, I felt hope. So there we were, completely inundated with information about Dylan's current situation and potential future. Overwhelmed with the immense weight of our situation, how little was known, and this increasing feeling of desperation kicking in, my mongoose came out and I began to take control. Countless hours in that deep, dark hole of Google searching, countless doctor's appointments, and trying to understand how I could help my daughter avoid this horrific fate. It was then I learned we lived in a state with extensive benefits for children like Dylan. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, music therapy, applied behavioral analytics, habilitation, respite. Again, my mongoose was there and pushed me to action. Whatever therapy I could find that had even a chance of helping Dylan, I sought it out and I fought for it. But what I had underestimated was how difficult it was to not only qualify for, but to also secure these resources. Insurance claims, denials, appeals, state assessments, denials, appeals. And once we had finally secured the necessary approvals, the fight to find quality providers began. It seemed that each time we would find a match for Dylan, the provider would either no-show to their interview with us or quit within days or weeks. And to be fair, Dylan was not easy to work with. Her sensory-seeking behaviors had continued to increase, as did her destructive and aggressive behaviors. She would sit and rock and rock and rock, self-stimulating to calm down. If we tried to engage her when she wasn't interested, she would lash out, hitting, biting, or grabbing my hair, and she had a grip. Now, we knew she didn't mean us harm, but her providers would lose patience and decide to find greener pastures. And each of these provider losses felt like another punch to the gut. You see, as Dylan would start to get to know a new person and develop that trust, they would leave, further agitating her difficulty with change and exacerbating these challenging behaviors. Throughout all of this, I became increasingly active in the MBIA community, talking to as many other MBIA families as I could find. And these families were so generous with their time and insights, helping us navigate the emotions going through our heads, answering my endless questions, and frankly, providing answers to questions we didn't even know we should have. It was incredible that after feeling so alone in this journey, there were others who understood, truly understood. So for the first time, we felt part of a tribe, or if we were mongooses, a mob of families who were together and supporting each other on this journey. We then became excited, anticipating the upcoming MBIA Disorders Association Family Conference. How amazing would it be to meet other families on this same journey face to face, and to meet the researchers from around the world where we could learn directly from them about the important work being done to help all of those affected by MBIA. But despite the comfort I had found in this community, that first conference was devastating. You see, Dylan was about 3.5, and we found only one other family at this conference with a daughter even close to Dylan's age. All of the other families were much farther along in their journey with the disorder, and as a result, we were immediately face to face with our futures. Wheelchairs, feeding tubes, dystonia, uncontrollable seizures, inability to communicate. It was traumatic. And that family with a daughter close to Dylan's age became our lifeline. Each night of this conference, we would gather in one of our hotel rooms and just unload. We would cry a lot, and we would drink far too much. We had no idea how to live life knowing what was coming. It was like we were stuck on a train track with no idea when that train was coming, but we could see that light ahead of us in the distance, knowing that it would come and it would destroy our lives. And this began a very dark year for our family. I worked far too much, and when I wasn't working, I drank far too much. I did practically anything I could to escape the reality of my life, and it is not a time that I'm proud of, and in many ways, I paid that price. Despite being my most significant time of need, I began to lose many of my friends. And feeling more and more alone, I became angry, and this anger only had one direction to go, directly at my husband. Our marriage suffered, and we fought incessantly. You see, the way Matt and I process our grief is just so very different. Or my mongoose went into overdrive, and I began to find comfort in taking control over every aspect of our lives. He emotionally withdrew. And we discussed divorce quite often during that time, but the reality of our situation was that we were completely dependent on each other for the care of Dylan. So instead, we just did our best to simply coexist. But I remember a moment when I realized we had to better manage this tension that was building between us. We were in our kitchen, and Matt and I were fighting about something. I honestly don't even remember what. But Dylan stepped in between us and started loudly babbling and shaking her finger at us. And at that moment, I realized she was mimicking our behavior, and my heart broke in two. I would love to tell you that this is when we saw the error of our ways and turned things around, but we didn't. The next year, I received a call from the MBIA Disorders Association. They had observed my engagement at the conference and across social media platforms. And after learning of my professional experiences, they were hopeful that I would fill an open seat on the board. I was shocked. While my professional career had not been impacted by my destructive behavior, I certainly did not feel I was deserving of such an important role. So I asked for time to think about it, and after much soul searching, I realized that this could be exactly what I needed, something to focus on, some way to feel like I could make a difference in the awful future that lay ahead for Dylan, a way to change her outcome and the outcome for all of those with an MBIA disorder. And that decision was the right one. I suddenly had a healthy outlet to channel my fierce need to help my daughter, to give my mongoose something tangible and positive to focus on. And the darkness began to lift. And 1 year later, when our board chair stepped down, I was asked to fill his seat. Again, I found comfort in this increased level of connectivity to the organization, which gave me hope. But at this point, my own life began to change. I was now balancing a highly demanding career, my advocacy for Dylan's needs, my role as a mother, all the while trying to become a better partner to my husband. My position at the firm was one of the most challenging yet most rewarding jobs I ever had. I was offered an opportunity to lead client teams and supporting large retirement plan sponsors. We were helping thousands upon thousands of people prepare for a dignified retirement, something the statistics will show you will not happen without employer-sponsored programs. So this passion for my job, my work for the association, the constant focus on portraying a positive attitude despite the chaos in my life, and providing the best opportunities for my daughter all distracted me from what my body was trying to tell me. that something was very, very wrong. I was traveling for work more than I had anticipated, and I was getting worn out. I had become increasingly short of breath with less and less exertion, and I found myself barely able to walk up a jetway without my heart feeling like it would beat out of my chest. I created excuses telling the colleagues traveling with me that I needed to use the restroom when, in fact, I needed to sit down so I could just catch my breath. With a demanding schedule both at work and at home, I rarely made time to see a doctor. And when I did, these and other symptoms were attributed to anxiety or the fact that my weight had become unhealthy. Exactly what a woman wants to hear. Recognizing that all of this was taking more of a toll on my family, my body, and my life than was sustainable, I decided it was time to reassess my role at the firm. I needed to find a job where I could continue to support my family, but where I could significantly reduce my time on the road traveling. I applied for, and on the day after Thanksgiving, I was offered a role leading a high net worth sales team. And my transition would take several months and was expected to finalize in February. So as I prepared to take on this new role, I took time off for the holidays. You see, each year we would visit my dad at his home on Mount Charleston, where we would enjoy a beautiful white Christmas. Year after year, I suffered from elevation sickness, which got progressively worse. What had become headaches had escalated, and this time it was so bad I could not prevent myself from continually passing out. Here we were, Christmas morning, and as I tried to engage in the joy and laughter all around me, I would nod off over and over again. And of course, this worried everyone. So my husband quickly packed us up to head to the hospital. Yet as soon as we got down to a lower elevation, I began to feel normal. So I convinced my husband that we should just make the drive home to Phoenix. I would be fine. The next day, although feeling a lot better, I did have a persistent cough that had kept me from sleeping. And knowing that a good night's sleep would be the trick, and that a doctor could prescribe me stronger cough syrup than I could get myself at the pharmacy, I went to urgent care. I will forever be thankful for the doctor on call who paused to ask questions about my symptoms and learned of my extensive travel habits. He ordered a chest x-ray, which showed a shadow that he suspected was pneumonia. But to be on the safe side, he wanted me to go to the ER to rule out a pulmonary embolism. At that time, I had no idea what that meant. And being a frequent flyer at hospitals for Dylan, and in typical workaholic fashion, I first went home to get my laptop so I could get work done while I inevitably waited to be seen. I walked into that ER waiting room where the nurses at the check-in station took my information and checked my oxygen saturation level, which was at 68%. The look on their faces was almost comical. They shifted into high gear and hurriedly put me in a wheelchair, taking me back to be seen. I told them I felt fine. I just have a cough, and the urgent care doctor wanted me to just double check an x-ray. Let's not overreact here. But little did I understand that most people should not be able to stand with an oxygen saturation that low. I, however, had grown accustomed to this level of breathlessness and didn't understand the damage I was doing to my body. So I was taken to the CT scanner, and 30 minutes later, the doctor came in. And he said, I quote, "Good news, it isn't a pulmonary embolism. Bad news, it looks like you might have a chronic lung disease." And again, excuse my language, but what the fuck? I was admitted to the hospital that day, and I felt the earth shift under me. Suddenly, I felt terrified and powerless. I didn't ask the right questions, and frankly, I didn't ask any questions. I said yes to any test or treatment they recommended. Where was my mongoose? I had expected to be the fierce advocate for myself that I had always been for my daughter, yet I wasn't. The doctor said he had an idea of what might be happening in my lungs, but needed to do some research and would be back to discuss next steps. When he returned hours later, I learned a new 24-letter word: lymphangioliomyomatosis. He told me it was a rare disease that he knew very little about, and the only way to confirm the diagnosis was through a lung biopsy. But before he would feel comfortable doing this biopsy, he wanted to do a heart catheterization. I was considered obese, and he worried that my heart would not be healthy enough to get through the biopsy. And this is when things really started to go sideways. This heart catheterization procedure was a complete cluster. That team in the operating room was unprofessional, speaking as if I wasn't even in the room, lamenting equipment that wasn't working, and complaining that their supplies hadn't been restocked. When I not so kindly shared that I could hear them and they were scaring me, they told me I'd be fine and continued forward. I was terrified, and I sobbed through that entire procedure. After returning to my room, I immediately called 3 of my closest and strongest girlfriends, women who had become my mongoose mob. You see, I was alone at the hospital because my husband, out of necessity, was with our daughter. But I realized then I was unable to advocate for myself, and I needed the help of someone else who could be my mongoose. Within an hour, this trio of friends stood next to me, each agreeing that something was wrong. They encouraged me to call my primary care doctor, who I trusted at the Mayo Hospital, for a transfer. Yet this hospital where I was being treated tried to dissuade me, telling me that I would have to leave against medical advice, which could negate my insurance coverage for everything that had been done up until this point. It was scare tactics. And thank goodness I trusted my friends and insisted I had to go. Once I arrived at the Mayo Clinic Hospital, I was met with an entire team of doctors and specialists. Yes, an entire team in one room. They confirmed my diagnosis. I had lymphangioliomyomatosis, which they explained was an extremely rare lung disease that affects approximately 3,500 women worldwide. This disease has caused my lungs to be riddled with innumerable cysts, and these cysts have taken over my healthy lung tissue, which made it impossible for my airways to function and explained my constant shortness of breath. When I asked about the need for a lung biopsy, which had just been recommended at the prior hospital, they explained to me that that course of treatment would have likely ruptured cysts, which would very well led to an immediate need for a lung transplant, which I was not likely to survive in my current condition. I was sent home the next day and told I would need supplemental oxygen 24/7, and I would need to prepare for a double lung transplant evaluation immediately. My fears overwhelmed me, and the questions were like rapid fire in my brain. It was like I was drowning in a sea of anxiety. I had just accepted a new job and was the primary breadwinner of my family. Would I be able to continue working? Would they change their minds about wanting me to lead this team? Had my ability to support my family been taken from me overnight? How would I stay healthy taking drugs that would make my immune system obsolete? And would I be strong enough to survive a lung transplant? And if I didn't survive, how would my husband care for our daughter without me? Terrified, I called my new leader to share the news that my entire life had changed since he offered me that job. I'd have to be away from work during countless hours of testing and appointments, and I might need a transplant that could take me out of work for months or more. And so I braced myself for his reaction and disappointment, but it didn't come. What I thought would be an awkward discussion wasn't. He didn't even flinch. He said, okay, we'll get through this together. You focus on you and I will focus on getting you back to work. And he did. That day, he showed me that he genuinely cared about my well-being, both through his words and his actions. And I will never forget that moment when I learned what it truly means to be a leader. As my return to work got closer, my vanity set in. I was going back to work in a new department with new people, and I'd be wearing oxygen on my face. I had always been an outwardly strong leader, and now my vulnerability would be out there for everyone to see. And this was terrifying. How many times was I going to have to explain my situation? I had already grown tired of making my disease safe for others. Often, as I shared the news with friends and family, I found myself comforting them as they cried for me, and it was exhausting. I had barely begun getting comfortable with the idea myself. Trying to comfort others was simply too much. I'd begun experiencing the stares when my family was out, and I was afraid the people I now worked with would do the same. Would they treat me like I was broken? Would they judge me and assume I'd done this to myself somehow? Or would they think I was contagious and avoid me? Just after the new year, I was invited to a celebration at a department leader's home. My first reaction, not a chance. I was afraid of people's reactions and said as much to the host. But instead of minimizing my concerns, she empathized. She asked how she could make it comfortable for me, which essentially amounted to not making it a big deal, and please, no open flame, because as I had just learned, oxygen and open flame could be a pretty big boom. So I went to this party, and it was wonderful and exactly what I needed. These people saw my new reality for the first time in a social and safe setting. So when I returned to work, my disease and my oxygen had become old news. They already asked their questions, they had their reactions, and we'd all moved on. It was amazing. What I learned here was twofold, that people care more than I could have imagined. And when I open up about what I need, people willingly and enthusiastically offer their help. Now, without a doubt, those first few months after my diagnosis were the hardest. My health was declining quickly, and I began actively preparing myself and my family for the inevitable transplant. But then, the meds I was prescribed, they started working. I was stabilizing. Suddenly, with transplant not in my immediate future, I was able to accept my new reality and start to find a rhythm. I lugged around an oxygen tank everywhere I went, and instead of being embarrassed about it, I cracked jokes about it. And this became the office joke, one that I embraced. My team found it hilarious that at least once or twice a day, I would either run over a foot or knock the tank into a wall. And my husband would love to remind you that I've never been a very good driver. But despite the gratitude I felt for these miracle drugs, I still saw that train coming. But now there were two, Dylan's disease and mine, and I have no idea which will hit my family first or when. So again, I began coping in unhealthy ways. My drinking came back, and I found too much comfort in food. And as a result, my already small friend circle shrunk even more. I had grown to be more overweight than I had ever been, and I tried to be more active, but found myself uninspired and challenged to find solutions that kept my oxygen levels high enough to do those activities I had once taken for granted. I found myself unable to chase Dylan around the house or play with her at the park. I couldn't keep up with colleagues walking to and from meetings at work, often finding excuses to just walk alone. And I found myself constantly worried that I would come into contact with someone who was sick, because these prescriptions, they compromise my immune system, and getting sick myself would mean another hospital visit or worse. But as I kept pushing forward, the mongoose remained right by my side. I earned another opportunity at work, a fully funded graduate school program, and a job leading a department. Despite many warnings from family and friends who questioned my sanity and the ability to add even more to my plate, my ambition, fueled by my mongoose, got the best of me, and I accepted both. Again, here I was, balancing motherhood, a career, and advocacy, then add grad school. I had come to believe that I could do anything as long as I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. However, this is when I truly began to experience my limits, and my anxiety turned into panic attacks. Instead of seeing this as a warning sign and adjusting accordingly, I did what I always did and repeated my mantra, keep on keeping on. But then COVID happened. When it began hitting the news, I quickly understood the implications for Dylan and for me. Dylan was considered high risk due to her epilepsy or asthma, and my lungs, with very little healthy tissue left, would likely be destroyed by this virus. Suddenly, it felt like the world was closing in around me, and despite these personal implications, I was responsible for a department of people and had to figure out how to get them home and safe. And this required around-the-clock hours in planning exercises. And this is when those panic attacks, to which I'd grown accustomed, started coming at me multiple times a day. I simply lost my ability to cope, and I had a breakdown. For the first time since Dylan was born, I was forced to prioritize myself over everything else. I found a therapist and took a leave from work to try and put myself back together. I'm still on that leave, and I'm just starting to see a glimmer of the horizon ahead of me. It's been a dark period lasting several months, and I am often overwhelmed by the uncertainty of our future. The future of COVID, of Dylan's disease, of my own. However, what I have learned is how to find peace, emerging in the form of presence and radical acceptance. During these last several months, I have spent more quality time with Dylan than I have in her entire life. We enjoy dance parties every morning in our living room, where you can often hear her shout that girls run the world. Thank you, Beyonce. Her birthday, which is often a balance of celebration and that gut-wrenching fear that we're 1 year closer to her degeneration, was different this year. Instead of planning an over-the-top, Pinterest-worthy celebration with everyone we knew, we spent the day together, just the three of us. Everything was adjusted to her needs and at her pace, with the singular goal of bringing her joy. And while I will never, ever stop fighting for a better future for her, that fight has now shifted a bit. I recognize I am doing everything I can for her. And this knowledge has given me the gift of lessening my anxiety, which had for so many years fed on my joy each and every day. This growth has not come easily, and it's certainly not complete. I've been diagnosed with PTSD and am part of an intensive outpatient program where I continue to learn skills that help me manage and cope with both these big things and the little things. My perspective has changed, and I realize now that while the hardest part of our lives is ahead of us, I can build both the mental and the physical strength I will need to be ready for that fight. And I have my pulmonologist to thank for my physical health, because she had the courage to sit me down and have a very difficult but honest conversation with me. She helped me see that until I reached a healthier weight, I would not qualify for a transplant if I needed it, which meant I would have no hope when the time comes. She gave me the kick in the ass I needed, and I am happy to say that I've lost 60 pounds since that discussion, both through diet and my new best friend, my Peloton. I am stronger than ever. I might need 10 liters of continuous oxygen to keep up on that bike that goes nowhere, but I do it again and again and again. I've also come to realize the true power of gratitude. Instead of focusing my energy on the bad and the sometimes terrible things that lie ahead of us, I find myself looking for the good. And there is so much good in the world. Dylan is still my sweet, charismatic little girl who loves roller coasters and far, far too much Baby Shark. I'm home every morning for these dance parties and every evening for cuddles before bed. I still have my inner mongoose who pushes me to fight for her every need and to advocate for my own. And I have a stellar medical team and am afforded the opportunity to speak at conferences like these, raising awareness for all rare disease patients. My lung function has been stable for more than a year, and I no longer need oxygen while I'm sitting. And that transplant isn't something we expect this month, this year, or even within 5 years. And I'm valued and supported in a still challenging and stimulating career. While my circle of friends is smaller, it's strong and supportive. And although COVID has made physical contact impossible, I am talking to my family and loved ones now more than I ever have. And most importantly, like a mongoose, this journey has helped me develop the resilience beyond what I could have ever imagined. And I know I will be strong enough to keep up the good fight. So while I know the future will be beyond challenging, for now, I'm grateful for every single moment I still have. I'm preparing to return to work, and while I know there will be tough days, I'm comforted, knowing that in those moments I'll be again able to call on my mongoose and repeat my mantra, keep on keeping on. Like many of you, my life has been full of cobras to fight. As I reflect on my journey, there are 3 key lessons that my mongoose has taught me, and I hope these lessons will help at least one of you as you face off with your own cobras. The first, like a mongoose facing a cobra, fight as if your life depends on it, because it does. Secondly, as a mongoose has reacted to venom over time, you will develop your own resilience. So don't give up, because it will get easier. And similar to mongooses, who often live in groups called moms, there is strength in numbers. So don't be afraid to seek out and lean on your community. Ask for help and let others take the lead when you need to take care of yourself. In closing, I appreciate all of you for taking a moment amidst the madness that exists in the world today to listen to my story. Thank you.
Meg, thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing and awesome. And been watching some of the chat and some of the things that people have been saying there. So want to take just a minute or two and just go over a couple of questions that have come in a little bit ahead of time here. What would you tell other moms and parents juggling a rare diagnosis for themselves and their child?
Oh, I wish I had sage words of wisdom. I'll say this is for the moms and dads out there, that Literally, our lives depend on our ability to continue fighting. And every day we have a choice to continue to step up and be there for our kids, or to step back. But I think most importantly, and the thing that I missed in so many years of my life, was the importance of taking care of myself throughout that journey. I often think back and wonder how long I had this disease where all the signs were there. And had I just prioritized myself a little bit more, we might have caught it and things might have looked just a little bit different. So take care of yourselves.
Awesome. Next question. What works in your life? Your schedule, your school plan? What doesn't? And how can patients and families find tools, systems, and resources that meet their needs and work?
Oh, gosh, I wish it was an easy answer. I think the first most important thing was this realization that I had that there are a lot of state resources depending on where you live. But I've been amazed in the state of Arizona how many hours of support and therapy that we've been able to get for our daughter. Now, I shared in my talk that those are not easy to get. I'm not going to tell you you will get the approval right away, but what I found is, if you're a little bit annoying and a little bit of aggressive, you can get those things through. And frankly, that has been the only way that we can continue working, is by having some of that support. We're also really fortunate that, Dylan, for many kids, their ability to become typical and be part of the mainstream is there. But for Dylan, she won't have that. And so we made the decision to not opt for an inclusive school, but to pull her into a school that's just for special needs children. And what we found is that has allowed us to really focus on that joy every day and the skill building without the concern for academics that frankly she's not going to use. So I think to answer the latter part of your question, it's really about connecting with a community. I'm not a massive fan of things like Facebook, but I have found Facebook to be a lifeline in that there are groups out there. And so when Dylan was diagnosed, there were only 50 people in the world with what she had. I was able to talk to them all. The other day, her seizures are starting to get out of control again, and I'm considering a surgical option for her. And I was able to, through, the amazing technology that's available to us, reach out to a family in Australia and talk to them about their experience with that same surgical intervention. And it's amazing. So just rely on your community and ask the questions, because there really isn't any stupid question. We all start from someplace.
All right. Last question here. What do you think the rare community is lacking?
That's a deep one. I think the challenge that exists in the rare community right now is that while rare disease, when we're all pulled together, we represent the largest body of disease. Individually in our groups, we're so small that we become a bit insignificant. And for my own patient advocacy group, our biggest challenge is finding funding to be able to support these research grants and to be able to give us the hope that we need. We have families who are very active, but there's only so much you can tap into these families. So I would say what this rare disease community needs is to come together and recognize that we are stronger as a collective, and we have benefit when we can come together and find similar diseases where maybe research can be pulled together and we have a broader pool to pull from.
What do you see, so in kind of that same vein with where it was lacking, and you kind of touched on it a little bit there, what does the rare community do well? What do you see them doing well?
Yeah, what I find, I am amazed at the engagement and passion that both patients and caretakers bring to fighting for people. I am very fortunate in that I have the MBIA Disorders Association, but I also have the LAM Foundation for my own disease. And I am amazingly proud of how hard every single person works to advance research and to raise awareness. So I think what the rare disease community does really well is identifies the needs and starts trying to advocate for them. We just need scale.
Well, within your opinion, and you're kind of unique in that you have a rare disease, you have a child with rare disease. Eden has the same thing. What do you see as possible collaboration points between these groups, though, so that we're not just a silo in and of ourselves?
Yeah, I think what we have an opportunity to do is identify maybe some of the underlying symptoms that have similarities across disorders. So for example, with BPAN specifically, BPAN is a little bit different than some of the other MBIA disorders in that seizures are a huge challenge for the families and the people with the disorder. And so I believe that there's an opportunity for us to get more connected to the epilepsy world and recognize that it may not be BPAN epilepsy, but there may be opportunities for us to get a little bit closer to some of these symptoms and the management of that while we're also working on treatments and cures for the future.
All right. Well, that was our last question. I want to thank Meg. Eden wants to thank you too. You're awesome. What a great example. I think that everyone that was able to log on here was able to see it. Our next session that is coming up is the future of online education, ensuring ongoing accessibility. And Meg, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. We love you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Good luck, everybody.